beginning of a series that we're going to be holding again in the school, midday series of lectures, and I'm very pleased that Luis agreed to be here for the first. Well, it's really a pleasure to introduce Luis. He's a close friend, actually. He was a great roommate that he came to be with us this term. Let me just tell you that he, as you all know, has a practice in Spain with Begona Fernandez-Shaw, and that this is a firm that has won numerous important competitions in Spain, and we'll be seeing a number of these, I believe. The work is very widely published internationally. Has been at the Biennale of Spain, Venice, and many other important exhibitions. He's an associate professor at the Department of Architecture at Escuela Técnica Superior. Now my pronunciation has never been very good, de Arquitectura in Madrid, since 1992, where he was educated. He also holds a master's degree from here and taught here regularly from 1994 to 98, and again in 2002. I should mention, too, that he is a writer of theory and reflects on many significant topics in architecture, and that these are widely known. It's published in AMU, Alcazar, Casabella, many other significant works. But I wanted to just reflect for a moment and tell you that I see already, and you can, I think all of you recognize, in the studio where his commitments lie. A studio about a problem in Venice, which is, in his theoretical framework, unsolvable in any straightforward way, and thereby requiring speculation in a very particular directed sense of it. And this has to do, I think, with the way he binds architecture to the city. This is probably, for me, the thing that stands out about his work is a new definition of a connection between architecture and the city. And it came to me very clearly and most explicitly when touring his works with him years ago. And when he told me he thought of the city more like crust than like fabric. And this would seem just to be a changing of terms, but it actually spoke to the way he thinks about buildings as frozen episodes of urbanity in a very particular form. It was at the Auditorium building that I experienced this with him in Guadalajara, where the building, by virtue of its material condition, the concrete, and the way it's structured to its orientation on the interior relative to the outside, where the pressures are very different on its in its site. This combination of a reorientation that occurs in the experience of it and its monolithic material make it not so much a building that stands on its own like an object, even though it does and has to given the site and the density, but something far more ambiguous, almost something more like a building cut out of a larger urban condition and embedded so particularly in it that still it seems to be continuous with it. So it is already giving evidence to architecture informed by the city, but inventing it in entirely a new form and manifest only in a single work, which is the architectural work. It's not an architecture which is just coming out of urban design by any means. It comes from within the discipline. And that also is owing to one more thing I wanted to speak to, which is a long-standing intellectual project, which I think continues, but has really taken quite a turn recently from his interest in the work of Le Corbusier. I don't think we should entirely leave behind how important it was, at least in the early projects, where there, again, he witnessed a significant shift, particularly between the early Corbusier and the later. Obviously, he's got attachments to the later that are more evident to us. But most recently, it was in this project for the Civic Center at Acronia, which I talked with him about. I had only seen it in images, but something new happens there, and I'm looking forward to him showing it to us. I believe he will. A different kind of continuity, of a spatial kind, with the structuring of the building than we had seen with the monolithic concrete work. And I think we'll see here that something happens more to do with the way the systems seem to be co-determined internally, and I'm going to be asking and wondering far more with this project how he binds this back into the city. In the instance that the city has many different tectonic formulations, it's not as explicit in its reference back to that as the earlier. But as we all will know, it's very much indebted to the circumstances of the site. Well, there are many ways to think about it, and I'm going to leave it to Rojo to explain. So I'll only this to share with you my own sense of what he does. I'm always looking at every one of them. You can mine from his projects, every one of those, so many particular lessons. It's one of the few cases where an architect practices and theorizes the practice, and it is part of the disciplinary development that contributes intellectually in the school. So, with that, welcome back. Theory.
First of all, thanks, Scott, for the introduction. You've been talking like a friend. More than anything else, I wish I could do that. So that's what I tried. And I think the studio and the intention of the studio, you're right. I'm going to try to show that plays along the lines of the work we try to do in our office, and that means that that we try to establish the balance between the try to find a balance between the kind of problems that we are faced with as architects and the kind of say controlled intellectual and professional response that we want to give to them. And by that I mean that Spain is a little bit different from some other countries in that every public building, everything that the state buys, the city hall, local government buys, so to speak, has to go through a competition, has to go through a bid. So either if you buy pencils or you buy a building, you have to go through a bit. And that has created a culture, an architecture culture in Spain, which I think is quite responsible for the kind of work that has been done since 1975. Because every time a public building is built, you have to win a competition. If you want to become the architect, you have to set up within the frame of this sort of competitive environment. You have to define your identity and your way of work, your set of interests. And for us, that approach, that kind of approach has to do with the idea that the architectural problems are created by the architects, are not given to the architects. Architects do not confront architectural problems. Architects invent those problems. They, rather than invent, we construct those problems. And in order to construct those problems, we have to be very careful in balancing the kind of description of architecture that we come across every time that we face with a project, and the way, and by that I mean reality and its complexity, its nuances, its difficulties, its arbitrariness, its lack of rationality, its incoherence, etc. All the kinds of circumstances which basically come together in the description of a particular architecture project, and the way it becomes a problem when it gets constructed in the mind of the architect, not as it is given, but when it's reconstructed literally within the field of architecture, within the discipline of architecture and architectural problems. So that's to say that we think that the problem is neither to add complexity or to add simplicity to the architectural projects. The problem is finding a balance between a complex description of the problem that we are faced with all its sort of sides, and the capacity to orchestrate within the discipline of architecture a response to that kind of scenario, to the kind of to the description of a piece of reality. So it has to do with constructing, with re-describing a particular moment of reality through architecture. And that's what I think we try to do. And that's what I think I tried to do with the studio. I tried to find a particular condition in reality, half real, half invented, but anyway, like a potential situation within reality that has a complexity that has to be filtered and structured, that has to be thought through architecture, and it has to be literally architectural. And I think that to show. And I'm going to try to show this through 3 or 4 examples, depending on how long it takes. This one, I think it's a housing project in Spain, which I think gives a fair account of what I'm trying to say. This was a competition for a housing project, for public housing project, in which the regulations of the city for housing literally mismatch the needs of the client, which was a public client. And that difficulty, the tension between those two conditions, I think describe quite well how architecture faces, or how architects face very often the reality of the problem. On the one hand, the regulations basically define a geometrical container within which architecture had to be contained, which is this one. The shape of a traditional house with its beach roof, 7 meters tall, 45-degree angle inclined planes for the roof. And within the boundaries of that mathematical or legal shape, everything could be done. Outside those, nothing could be done. Which, again, it's a weird way of making the norm, because the norm should be about all things, but not capable of defining so clearly and so sharply. And then on the other hand, we had to build 75 units. And the only way in which 75 units could be built was by using the whole volume that the legal norms allowed for. So we had to occupy the whole section, and we had to work with a section that was given to us, with a profile that was given to us, that with not a little irony, it was a profile that was defined legally, but that it has a tremendous amount of iconographic value. And that was, for us, the way in which this sort of almost absurd problem of clients asking for things and law asking for other things and site conditions defining certain geometries, certain boundaries, etc. We try to resolve the problem within these two three paradigms. One of them, of course, is repetition. because housing units, mostly public housing units, are the result of repeating a particular number of units. There might be several of them. On the other hand, there is an issue of repetition and uniformity, and then there was also this issue of the iconographic container overlaid over the project by the law, and then the technical resort to prefabrication in concrete in order to create an envelope, to create a surface, what I guess Scott has referred to crust, that would provide, on the one hand, a uniformity for the whole number of different units and different conditions, thus defying repetition, and on the other hand, allowing us to change the perception of that iconographic profile, of that container with iconographic qualities that we were imposed or we have to use. And that's what the project is about. So, at the end of the day, this is a very, I think, a very contemporary use of the technological means. In this particular case, the technological means of prefabricated construction. Because prefabricated construction in concrete allowed us to introduce another layer to that idea of continuity, which is the ornamental quality of the striation of the concrete panel, which is basically the result of repeating a certain pattern, but that by literal displacement and change of scale, change of level, or change of position, it creates again, it increases again a tension between the idea of the envelope as something of the crust, creating a figure of continuity that has to do with the volume independent from the repetition of units inside, and creating a unity that works for the spaces which actually are even more important to us than the units, which are the spaces within the units, which are the sort of those pathways and gardens and internal streets that are created, that are built within the blocks. These are views of the interior units, which are of two kinds. They are the ground floor, they are side to side, and they use the garden on both sides of the side of the ground level. And then the ones on top, in order to be able to deal with, to resolve the problem of the inclined plane of the pitch roof, we developed a kind of duplex unit that allowed us to either, depending on the orientation, north or south, have two different kinds of conditions. In both cases, using the stair. One was based on the idea of having a double height. In the case of the unit, that was oriented towards the north, and the double height allowed to get sun or light, direct sunlight from the south, and the unit on the southern side that was using this little terrace, that was that is a kind of appropriation of an outdoor space, which is the same one that the units on the ground level are using, which is in this case. This is the unit at the ground level that works in this direction, perpendicular to the longitudinal axis of the block. It's constructed around two units of bathrooms, and then the rooms are just placed around in a rather open way within the limits of the number of bedrooms, and then some open or outdoor spaces are either embedded inside or left in between in order to create continuity or connections perpendicular to the block. with the gardens, while the duplex units above, they work in the opposite direction. They work along the line of the longitudinal axis of the block, and the one to the northern side has the terrace above, to the southern side, sorry, and the one to the northern side has the bubble height that allows for jumping over to the other side and the other side. So I think that no matter how tight the problem was for all these sort of given preconditions, that have to do with reality, that have to do with the way in which things are running in this world, money and law, and we try to protect architecture. Basically, I think we do. We try to protect architecture by not, let's say, feeling that sort of this general disorder of the world is something that doesn't allow to produce an architecture that has an aesthetic value. But quite on the contrary, we think that it is precisely the capacity of architecture to organize with architectural instruments the particular order, the particular system of order of a problem, the particular architectural problem that we are interested in. The drawings are just expression of those mechanisms, right? Just the evidence of those. The mechanisms have been chosen in order to establish a relationship with that complex reality. In this particular case, the disengagement between the crust and the inside is expressed in the section, naturally, because all these units, which are halfway in between the idea of repetition and the idea of difference, basically get covered or enveloped by one scheme, one kind of scheme that is indifferent or independent from the spatial complexity that we have inside. And all these differences in space do not come to the facade because all the windows establish that condition. All the windows are the same size, same dimensions, same type of window. So all the windows are 220 by 220, and they might be displaced, they might find themselves in between, they might create more or less density, but they get repeated systematically in order to increase the problem of what is contained and what is that container, which is the nature, the continuous nature of that solid container, which has been ornamented with an arbitrary pattern, has to do literally with an idea of ornament, and what is the spatial manipulation of a repetitive system which is contained and confined within that crust in order to provide us with a filter between the expression of the unit and the non-expression of the unit and the capacity to work with the interstitial space between the blocks in another and a different way. This one. These are the panels, which are 12 centimeters in width, 10 centimeters for structural reason, 2 centimeters for the pattern, which is get into it. And then we can manipulate those blocks according to conditions that have to do with gardens contained within 2 blocks, or gardens which are split into by entries, and the blocks inside, they have the exits from the parking, etc. All of those conditions that would actually look for a kind of expression that is being literally contained or repressed within a continuous material system. So I guess that has to do with a very contemporary use of technology, so to speak, which has to do with the use of the technological device of technology of the precast concrete in order to undermine and at the same time transform a particular iconography which is contained or offered in the shape of the peach roof that we have to deal with, but we have to transform. We have to live with, but we have to take advantage of. And I think that this is one of those an architecture which is what's his name? The second project, just I think it's in the historical and regional archive in Guadalajara. I like to see it also in the same terms. In these sort of tension, the construction of a particular problem, that architectural problem, that chooses a way in which the problem that is given to us is read or restructured from within architecture and not from either the complexity of a reality that surrounds it or either another kind of interdisciplinary technique. Not because we have any problem with that, just because I think that there is a point, there is a moment in which architecture is a very effective mechanism for creating those conditions, those scenarios in which other things happen, all kinds of situations happen, and we like to look for those as well. The problem of the archive, any archive, is quite systematic. The problem of the archive is fire, and that's it. It's a technology. The probability that the archive will be destroyed by fire it's the goal of architecture. Architecture for an architect has its principal role is to find ways in which things can be preserved, and basically preserved from fire. So as a consequence of that, archives have its own technology, which is a technology of fire extinguishing. And in order to do that, they have discovered something which is quite, the result of common sense. The best way to resolve a fire is to avoid it. And for that, at the end, what archives, at least in Spain, are a number of concrete boxes which are piled one to another, one on top of another, creating a regular modular room system that, by means of this repetition, creates a certain ambiguity between whether it's a modular system or whether it's a structure, whereas the repetition of a unit, or whether it's a geometrical pattern in space. And the problem for us, as it was given to us in the brief of the competition, was that there is a part of the archive for the archivist and for the public that is basically detached from the rest of the program. So on the one hand you have the storage, and on the other hand you have the people either working or accessing the archive. So I think we won the competition because we tried to undermine that condition, and we tried to undermine that condition because we thought that, architecturally speaking, this could be redescribed in more interesting terms if both, rather than being separated, were together, come together, and we create, rather than having a building made out of two pieces, a large piece of storage and a small piece of public access, we could introduce the two together within one single structure. And when I mean structure in literal terms as well as in spatial or factual terms. And what we tried was to defined in a rather straightforward way because of the fire extinction regulations, the unit, which is this one, which is an issue of volume of air and paper that can be burned in a certain amount of times, and then it's a certain power of the fire which is extinguished. And the repetition of that unit in a system that has its own regularity and its own geometry. Once that geometry and that regularity is established, as very often it happens in architecture, the next steps have to do with working against those rules, working against that coherence or that system without breaking it, without going too far away. And in order to change or to adapt, to transform or to deform that geometry, we had two arguments. One was the argument of the public areas that had to be used by the public, which basically demanded a larger transparent space or open space that was at odds with the idea of the compartmentalization of the storage space. And the other one, the other argument, you can see here, basically you have the repetition of the units, and then at a certain point there is a breakthrough. There is a moment in which that system of repeated concrete coffins is being broken by its opposite idea, which is the idea of the panopticon, which is the recreation of the idea of total visibility. That it's not just that the public would enter into the public area, but people would enter into the building and would understand because they would perceive, they would see, they would get access to the whole structure of the building, like if it was a panopticon, like if it was a moment in a static moment of total visibility, which undermines completely the idea of the solidity and the concrete posture. This is how we worked this out. We tried to work it out using a second level of transformation or a second level of distortion of the grid that has to do with its position in the city. The building is facing a park. It's facing to the north, to the west, another public building which is important in the city. It's a social institution for social help and stuff like that. And then it has a very prominent slope as you go down to the back to the northern side of the site. And this is what we try to work out. There is this gap that runs from the public area to the central spine of the archive, to the area where the archivists work, that has that condition of transparency that moves along the slope of the site, and that creates a gap, like a cat, like a hollow part of the grid that allows to not just see but to understand what is the whole structure of the building, and making it so-called, so to speak, transparent. And there is a second deformation that has to do, as I say, with the conditions of the site. One is the deformation, this concave figure facing the other public building, and this concave one for a pedestrian passage that happens on that side. And then there is the frontality to the park and the frontality to the back that creates a continuous stripe of vision along. The models for the competition, and this is the other public building. This is the diagonal pedestrian walk. And here you have the building as it's being built, in which it's facing the main, one of the main streets in Guadalajara, which is just a city 50 kilometers north of Madrid. and this is the other public building, and this is the position of the building within the context and its deformation. The grid of the coffins of the storage space has been, the form has been turned around in order to face frontally both, this other building across, this other public building. I'm just trying to create a response to that while it frontally faces the park. And that distortion of the geometry is embedded within the fabric of the building, the structure of it, and the space, the spatial structure of the building. And the same when it comes to the slope. The building doesn't, same way that there is a distortion, there is a conflict between the opaqueness of the storage space and the transparency of the public spaces, or the usable spaces for the archivist. There is a conflict between the internal quality, the opaque quality of the building as such, and the way it tries to play a role within the city. The archive is a safe box, and it has no windows, so it very easily becomes an object within the site, and it becomes an opaque object within the site with very little connection to the existing or surrounding conditions or the patterns of the city as they are worked around. And what we tried to do was to make sure that the building would not read as being supported on the ground, but letting the ground run through and touch, and trying to show that there is this mechanism of transparency working, entering from the park at this level and exiting on this upper level. Which is what we try to keep here in the mall. And we constructed it according to these sort of dilemma between the solidity and opaqueness of the cover and the degrees of transparency that could be achieved by means of these operations or other materials. We started with building the structure in white concrete and creating this modular system of the coffer, the archive unit, which is filled up with the shelves and documents, and then the hollowing, the distortion of the grid in order to create spaces which are deep enough in the literal sense, so as to show the spatial structure of the hidden part of the building. This is the facade from the inside to the south, which has a special kind of glass that has a wooden system inside in order to control the sand and create the kind of shade. And this is looking backwards, moments in which this is the areas where the archivists work, and these are the areas where the public stand. And we developed this sort of kind of transparent device, which is basically a structure that holds glass for roofs and walls, and it's able to interlock itself with other spaces, creating that sense of continuity and division at the same time. Or degrees of transparency that have to do with the different uses. This is the lecture hall that has the buildings inside and has to be separated from the outside, or other degrees of transparency that have to do with the use of these aluminum metal panels that have been sort of worked out in order to scale down the mass of the object that is introduced within the city without scale, because it has no possible transparency, literal transparency from the inside to the outside, but it has to be worked out with invented transparencies with sort of manipulations of the scheme in order to control the perception of depth, the use of shadows, the degrees of transparencies, etc., etc. This is the concave side facing the other part of the building. These are the two mechanisms that we are using, which is always the mechanism is always based on a technical problem. Unless you fold the aluminum plate, you cannot work with it. It doesn't have the rigidity to be used on surfaces of large scale. So in order to be used, in order to be transported, in order to be placed within the facade, it has to be folded. And we, having that idea in mind, the facade actually what it does is recreate the idea of increasing the rigidity of the surface, which is this metal panel that has been perforated with in different ways in order to create large pieces which are capable of holding themselves rigidly, and then they can be placed on the facade with the light structure in time. And then the northern facade, which is this one, which we were told that the only facade that would have windows to the coffers, to the archival storage space, was the northern side, because the kind of light does not damage the documents, because it doesn't have bring sun into the spaces. But we have to double layer the facade with certain depth, so that the light will be very dim and will be quite controlled. So we developed, rather than making two layers of glass, what we did was develop this kind of this other layer of glass on the outside, which is curved, so that it distorts the ray of light, and it does not go straight all the way in. And from the inside, it creates an effect which like kind of lighting. So what you see towards the outside is a distorted perception of the city because of the refraction on the concave shapes of the glass. This is the entry to the front facade that, even if it's frontally facing the garden, is accessed on a diagonal from the side, which is where there is a connection between the front garden and the lateral street facing the public building, which is across, and is responsible for the deformation of the grid. As you can see here, this is the entry. So the building works in this direction with this diagonal shift, and that distortion, this deformation of the grid is what is being played all the time, whether it's opaque, whether it's transparent, whether it's regular and repetitive, whether it has been voided in order to create this panopticon simulacrum of vision that I was talking about. This is just to stress the idea that I think I've talked about this in the studio very often, that we think that in order to, that it's possible to determine which are the systems, even geometrical systems that work in such a way that they accept a certain degree of deformability, a certain degree of change without betraying its always mathematical or technical, geometrical nature, in order to play this game of a system confronted with peripheral conditions which distort the system. And the last one is this project that Scott was talking about, this social cultural center in La Coruña, which is, I think, a version, to me, probably not, but to me it's a version of the other one taken to an extreme. Because if the previous one it's about a very controlled distortion of the grid. V is an excessive distortion of a pattern in order to the point of being able to read the building both as a system of fragments or as one single object. And in the tension between those two potential readings is being solved by means of several mechanisms like articulation or again systems of control of the whole unit. I think that the project could be explained as it developed. This is La Coruña, which is a very beautiful city in the northwest of Spain, facing here the Atlantic Sea, with this beautiful geographical condition. It started there, this little peninsula, and it was destroyed this way in the 19th and 20th century in the regular way, you know, by building this, which I think it doesn't even deserve it. We were, this is again a competition, we were asked to make a proposal for a civic center here, right in here. This is funny because, again, we come back to this, the way in which things take place in architecture. This is a physical line. This is the end of the city. Literally, it's the end of the city. Not because of any other reason, but because somebody drew on a map, on a plan, that this was the end of the city. This line is the law, and it has become shape, it has become form, it has become city, it has become boundary, it has become, you know, whatever it is. So we arrived at the city of La Coruña the day in which they changed their mind, and they moved this line to this side. They jumped over. Now that you know, I don't want to be disrespectful for it, but the day in which somebody came up with the idea that urbanism and architecture were different, it was a mistake. And you can see it every single day that it's the same discipline operating at different scales, or however you want to put it. But certainly it's just a kind of problem that could be perfectly well resolved with architecture. The fact that this building was it was an idea of the socialist maker of the city, which had socialist ideas about the public space in the city. And by socialist, I don't mean socialist literally. I mean, I guess we hear social democrat, meaning that they think that public infrastructure should be provided for citizens to be used by them within like a kind of so-called European society. There's anything left of that. So the building was a social cultural center, which means for ourselves that we had a piece of each. You had the theater, you had the library, you had the public spaces, it had all the people could gather together, offices for the city hall, etc., etc. So we immediately thought that rather than being a complex programmatic problem, it was a very precise architectural problem, meaning that rather than providing a building with certain parts depending on certain uses, that we had to create a container, literally a container that would provide the conditions, the platforms, the spaces, or the grounds, where all of those activities or any other could take place. So the more complex the program was offered to us, the more we thought about the idea of flexibility. The idea that there was no relationship between the shape of the building, the form of architecture, and its use. It was rather like if the building was meant precisely for these sort of social ideas behind, was like a piece of the city. It was like an alter ego of the city. It was like an indoor piece of the city, where all the activities of the city, all the things that usually happen and programs in the city will take place within the building. That will probably be used today one way, but in 10 years' time will be used differently. And think that, again, I said this in the studio very often, you know, one has to be able to see backwards, because backwards is where the examples of architecture are. It's not about history, but it's about looking towards this sort of a number of other times in which problems of a kind have been solved by means of a specific mechanism that we start thinking about what buildings should be like that. And I think a fair example is the Pompidou Center in Paris. It's the idea of the container that, because if the public building stays transparent, but stays as well voided. It's like a voided space, a system of platforms that pushes everything to the edges and that creates the image of the building by means of manipulating either structure or infrastructure. In the case of Pompidou, it has to do with both. We decided to use just the structure and not the infrastructure, not the mechanical system. But we also thought that the way in which this building could rehearse its role within the city as an indoor public space was also by abandoning, to a certain extent, the paradigms of conventional paradigms of architecture and getting closer to more contemporary paradigms of linked to the idea of the landscape, to the idea of rather than the what's my telephone? It's got and so we were moving from an idea of interiorized space to an exteriorized space that was linked to the idea of the techniques of sort of the simulation of landscape. So rather than repeating platform in the Pompidou Center, we basically tried to use a system that was non-repetitive, that was articulated enough to create a diversity of platforms and programmatic conditions that would be joined slightly as in the capacity to create, as I said before, a certain amount of unity and a certain amount of fragmentation. This is how he presented the building to the competition, which is basically divided in four and being one single thing. Divided in four because it has a kind of a lobby space that joins them together on the back, and three elements which are on the front that create different conditions of use. And this is how we conceive the project, the competition at the beginning, in which these this sort of variety of different uses that it was going to have, and program or unprogram, were tied together by means of two mechanisms. One was the structural mechanism, the use of the structure as a visible image that would contain, that would define these platforms, that would be pushed to the edges, so the circulation would happen always around, would define spaces inside. And the other one was the material continuity of one single system of prefabricated construction, which is this one. You have the steel structure, and then you have a prefabricated system of beams that are either built in concrete or in wood, depending on the amount of deformability that they have to deal with. When the platform is flat, it's built in concrete. When the platform is not flat, it's built in wood. And then again, the use of the site and its slope, and in order not to change its condition of a site outside of the city, we try to take advantage of that by creating spaces that were underneath the building rather than in front of the building, which we thought were more usable from this point of view, the flexibility. And this is how we started developing the project, that, in which the large span structure was pushed to the edges, and then the platforms were built with a prefabricated system, and then the light was brought into these fat building by means of a system of skylights that would work their way through the section, either by lighting this room on top, either by lighting this room on the low level, or either by lighting the space below. And sometimes the structure of the building would sustain a certain regular geometry, and sometimes it would surrender to this deformation that was trying to imply the idea that the building was not just a piece of the city, but an outdoor piece of the city built indoors. It was like a chunk of the city confined within this large-scale structure. And this is the lobby that runs across, joining the three elements. And this is the only one in which there's a very particular program specificity because it had a theater inside. And this is how we built it. We built it still, creating a large-scale steel structure that would then be filled in either by the regular system of prefabricated concrete beams, or either by the ones in wood when the building, the shape of the building has a certain amount of deformation. And this is what I mean by sort of the tension between the fragmentation of the pieces that we see in the plan and the uniformity of the material and the structure, which is continuous all throughout. This was a few months ago, and this is how it was finished. This is this industrial glass, the U glass, which is insulated inside with the system that is responsible for the blue color. These are the spaces in between every finger and the space underneath for just now it's being used as a part of the kids' library. And again, you either have the same system. This is built in wood, and this is built in concrete, confined within the steel frame, but they are both the same dimensions, both the same sort of pattern. The wood allows for deformation, the concrete doesn't. Now, this is, of course, predicated on the idea that the furniture is going to be able to resolve the program specificity, which is what we propose them to do, and this is how we got the commission to design the furniture, which is even more difficult than to design the building. If you here. If you want to define a particular spot for a particular use, what you need to develop, this is one example, the first one we are working with, just this furniture, the entry of the building. You have to rely on the fact that there is an next order of functional specificity that has to do with the function and with the use. And this is the plan of the ground level. You can see here there is the lobby running across, and the different areas which either you drop them with the furniture, or they are just a system of platforms with the skylights running across. The moment you drop the furniture, when you put the furniture, then you define its functionality. When you take away the furniture, like the floor above, you basically have an open non-program space that we hope might play this role, public alter ego of the city, or a public space within an space. Okay, it's just to insist on the idea that it might either be considered building to be made out of fragments articulated, or might be considered as a solid element that has been subdivided because there is a tension between the continuity and the discontinuity. That's all.
Luis, we would like to field questions.
Sure. If there's any question.
I'm sure some of your students have questions. Is this the first time you've presented the projects directly to your students?
Yeah, students are too concerned with the final review to expect
I have a question, Chris. I'm Spanish, also Spanish architect, so I know how is the practice of architecture in Spain, and how difficult it is to sometimes to build something. There, even if you work with the public client that maybe is the best one after competition. So I would like to ask you something very like maybe practical. This: how is your work with the construction company? If how do you deal with it? How they collaborate in the process of construction to get the final result as good as you get it? How is the process if you have a specific strategy to make them collaborate with you, or you understand them as enemies? This is how it works.
A very non-academic advice I'll give you, but architecture, like mostly everything, is just a teamwork. Unless you can make a team, it's impossible to resolve problems of certain complexity and large scale. So I think it has to do with convincing everybody that it doesn't work of a team, it's not the work of one. There's the idea of one that is being developed by a group of people. And then I think that I insist, as I said at the beginning, I think it's very important not to think that every aspect of reality is an impediment for the architect to do his own thing. I think that's a very important. I think that the information you get from reality, information, even the information that it seems uninteresting or burden, is part of a complex description of a piece of life that surrounds you and surrounds the building. And I don't know any case in which erasing the complexity of the context, understood the context in its larger terms, has been of any help to any architect. And I think what is more paradoxical, even more absurd, is the insistent insistency that has taken place in architecture very often, that first you simplify reality and you get obsessed with complexity in architecture. As if there is no relationship. There was no relationship between the complexity already existing and the capacity of architecture to re-describe that complexity, as opposed to reinventing it just formally true. So if you want to be an architect, you have to like people.
I was a little bit startled by your comment, somewhat startled by your comment about the expansion of the city, Guadalajara, when you said that, the problem should not have been left only to urban planning, and that clearly if architecture had not been separated from it, things would be better. And yet, it seems to me that what you enjoy most doing is responding to that arbitrary tension and exploiting the very results of it. I mean, in a way, without that brutality of the city being fractured and ended randomly, and all of those things,
where would you be? You would not have that condition to respond to. You would not be able to mend it or call attention to it.
Are there no degrees to that?
Excuse me?
Are there no degrees to that? I mean, there is no...
Well, no, I mean, for example, I suppose architects would design the morphological characteristics of that expansion, or design how that expansion would be administered in terms of its shaping. But on the other hand, I would think you have, I can see already, preferred to work in an unplanned condition. It seems to me, because your buildings are able to benefit from, you know what I'm saying, asserting another value against that roughness, against that unplanned or managed.
At this stage of asserting it, it's not even an option. I mean, have you ever worked in a site or in a condition that was structured enough to be...
Yes, actually. I mean, unfortunately, most of them are. I mean, most of them are the setbacks all fine, the street pattern defined, in all of its ways wrongly, but no matter it is. Whereas what I sensed about that project is like what it looked like in that case was something situated without the strong parameters defined, predetermined by a master planning. I mean, that's what it looked like. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a master plan that you were operating within and that I didn't see.
The one in Korea?
No, Guadalajara, where you said the city boundary was moved, but it seemed to me the movement had not yet been defined as a design.
Yeah, there's a master plan.
So you fit directly and well within it?
Yeah, we fit within the master plan. For example, in something that it was a kind of a problem for us. At the same time, and right there is some of the ideas is that the building for the way the infrastructure is defined in the master plan privileged the fact that the building was backwards, was looking outside the city rather than towards the city. And this is how you get this aerial photograph, I think. And
this is
you see, the way the infrastructure has been defined in the master plan, which is not built yet, ironically, the building has. The building is basically looking backwards. It's not looking towards the city. It's not facing the city as a natural expansion, but it's backwards. So when we decided to...
Because that's been made a large block and yours is on the outer edge, on the new edge. So it's not backwards. I mean, it's just
it's facing out.
I mean, it's a block and your building is on the perimeter of the block. It just so happens you're on the edge, which is on the new edge. That whole thing is a block now that you're completely.
Yeah.
No, more than that. Keep going. Yeah, all of that. Maybe even
this was existing, and then they building a street across like that.
But isn't your building on the corner of that block?
Well, this building is on the corner of this street pattern that has to be built here.
But I'm looking at the buildings that are to the
thing.
upper right of it. Yes. It's not
Those are the backs of those buildings.
And your back faces their backs.
Well, we are facing.
Your backside faces the backs of these.
We tried that the building wouldn't have a back, so the building can be entered from below on this side and from above on this side, precisely because the building is working on both conditions at the same time. It's facing the main street this way, and it's facing that pedestrian streets and those blocks when you turn around. So the building doesn't have a clear front or a clear back. But in order to resolve that problem, we had to. We thought we had to make sure that the spaces that were on the so-called back were even more appealing, even more public than they were
It's just a temporal question. I mean, it really, what existed and what will come later. It has to do with the history of the city more so than whether or not it's the back, the front, the new. It's not. It doesn't seem to me as definitive that after this is finished will not be definitive of the city in the same way that the block structure is. I mean, once we see this entire master plan, you'll be embedded in the city. But you're enjoying, even now, describing a condition in which you're on the edge of something, as if somehow that difference between the city that existed and accumulated over a much longer period and this new section, which will probably accumulate over a far less, lesser period, is really where you're gaining a lot of the energy. I mean, as if this is something very important. It is now because your building stands without this, but later it would be the whole block pattern that will matter most. And you're really will define part of everything. Anyway, all I'm saying is that it does seem to be you like the undesigned circumstantial conditions, and I don't know why you would want the architects to control so much the destiny of all of that, which we describe as the city. I mean, you would want them to control pieces, but would you really like the architects to design this whole thing? Is that what you were calling for? I didn't know what you mean. I know what you mean by this lamentable divorce between urban design.
I was saying something more modest. I was saying that unless this you saying that this building will be embedded within the block, but that's not completely true because we have undermined, I think, I've tried to undermine the idea of the block by creating a space which, by being in the center of the block underneath the building, and being an entry that allows you to go this way and out, makes a difference in regard to the
much more porous
of the use of the block. While this building, with this building here, which is a swimming pool and a public school and stuff like that, cannot just be entered from the street, and they have a back here and create this edge, which is literally a back to the buildings and the back to the city. We think that if you think the problems of the city by through architectural means, you can discover devices that allow you to create conditions which are much more appealing from the point of view of how, let's say, this territory or this space is occupied. If they build blocks and they put buildings on the edges of the blocks, that's it. That's all you get. If you take advantage of the fact, for example, that at this point, whenever you look at this, you start wondering if the city gains anything from taking over this rural condition. And if it's not, one of the obsessions of contemporary architecture to reproduce within the city was sort of artificial pieces of nature. If it was an architect responsible for this, will probably, I think, would realize that this is the problem being approached upside down from the other side. We already have the sort of rural condition, which is already artificial, but it's there as a landscape. And we can occupy the ground in such ways that that is not fully undermined or destroyed. And that's what we try to do with our building. We thought that we do this as often as we can. If you're able to leave the ground, literally the ground, the topography as it was, and you create a sense of instability, the tension between the ground and the structure of the building will give you something back. Among other things, create spaces that have to do with topographical condition without having to rehearse too many artifices. And this is what I mean by that. That these building, somebody coming this way, this is a pedestrian walk and they're supposed to move up here, up the hill. They can, rather than use the street, they can use the building to move through. If they combine mechanisms of this kind, they will not have to just use the alternative of street versus block, building versus street, which I think is what the master plan is about. It's just giving a match and at least taking advantage of the potential of the problem.
I know you just kind of you just kind of mentioned the tension between the form of the object and the natural condition of the ground plane. Like, there's often like seems to be like like corners revealed or sort of this tension, and wondering what the attitude was, if you could elaborate on that, like what those spaces between the building and the ground are becoming, and what they, I mean, what is that? Is that a general attitude you have towards a lot of projects, or like this? Kind of the hedges.
Yeah. Can you go forward to images of it? Can you? Oh well, that's what he's talking about. But I want you to look at that too. But that's a different issue. It's about the roof. This is what he's asking.
Yes, there is a possibility to, in this particular case, because of the urban conditions of the site and because of the public program that it houses, you enter the building from below precisely because the entry to the library, which is one of the most used spaces today, is there. And once we did that, in order to make sure that there was a certain amount of permeability from the street to the inside, we raised this one and we located the parking and let's say the loading area down below this other solid. I said we do this often. What I'm trying to say, it's not that we literally raised the building from the side, but I think that if you flatten the site before you start, you always get the same problem. You always get the same problem as much as you have one thing on top of the cliff, basically. And you, if in doing so, you might have relinquished the potential tension between the ground that has not been touched just because it was found that way, and more unstable and imprecise relationship between the ground and the building that would create, most probably, would facilitate many things like entries or relationships between the inside and the outside, certain kinds of transparency, etc. Not literally that there are spaces below. In this particular case, for that space to work, because of the climate, which is the very rainy climate, like we located all these skylights that cut through the building and allow for lighting down below, and at the same time they structure spatially and just by means of walls the different modular repetition of rooms with which the specificity of the program is approached. Scott.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the roof, because then the roof is participating in something that exists today, that is this topographic condition of the, the soon to be urbanized setting. So will you imagine this to be referring to something that jumps out to another limit condition? I mean, what does it represent when the master plan is completed? What does your green roof represent at that point? An island? Or, because it has a very poignant connection right now. Is that very important to you that makes that connection today? And this again goes to the question of the duration of the planning. Your indebtedness to the fragmentary condition that exists right now. How contingent is your building on the circumstances of the time in which it's built, as opposed to the fulfillment of that plan?
The master plan calls for towers which are 14 stories high. And for reasons that I
Just thinking about what's going to happen.
But again,
What it's going to be.
once the whole thing is built, this
Yeah.
building will be flattened even more so than it is now, and become the ground no matter what we say about it.
So it'll be something you look down upon as almost like a park. I mean, you could make that roof accessible. You could have thought about it that way. Almost could have been a deck at that point. Because it would be more needed. The ground is made for the roof there. Something that people would.
The space that is accessible, that it did not exist before, is the one that is below, and the one that is above is the one, it's unnecessary to use because you have. The problem is not the amount of ground that
It's the porosity requirement, not to have a solid surface. But could you imagine a situation like that? I mean, the holes in your building in the plan would allow trees to grow through, and you're bringing this almost to the ground. He asked the question about why you've raised the building above the ground. I guess I'm wondering why you haven't brought the roof down to the ground. At some point, you bring this roof down to the ground. You've almost done it here. At this point.
that's the.
Of course, then you'd have railings, there are architectural consequences that you wouldn't want. I realize that may be your reason.
I think that
reason
I
you wouldn't-
believe that this kind of roof garden works.
Yeah,
Not just technically, but architecturally.
better
If,
without
it,
architecture.
if it's like a mirage, if it's like an image,
Right.
if it's something that you cannot use all the time,
Right.
I think it's an artificial
Yeah. I agree.
condition that is being recreated as an image, not as a reality.
Okay.
If you can get on top of it, then I think you support that
Yeah.
condition. Besides, there was no practical need to.
It's a big part of the idea of the project. You didn't say much about it. I mean, this view is very powerful. You went by it so fast. I was shocked by this view. I'd never seen it. That the roof is such a powerful part of the problem. I mean, it wasn't just the underside. This is diagonally opposite the side
Yeah.
where the underside is so significant.
Yep.
But this is major. I mean, so intense and sculpted. And the emergence of that one transparent surface as if the whole building is inside the crust again. Here we have the crust, and embedded in it is that captured open building. The building that captures a piece of the city interior as an interior, as you put it. And now the landscape is the mediator between those two ideas. It's not crust and it's not that frame, that interior frame space. Some other kind of material condition. It doesn't seem to be the crust. The crust, I mean, of architecture that makes the city. It's not that. It's like the city, the urban condition caught the site. It's inside out, It's the opposite of your auditorium. Do you know what I mean? You captured landscape inside, the limit of your building. On the roof of it, it looks like it's filled with dirt. I mean, the whole building is like a retaining wall from here. So it's not a party wall like the auditorium. And in the auditorium project, he didn't show an older project. The party wall idea is the limit condition of the building as an object. It looks like a building that's cut out of a larger fabric in some ways, like the party walls of a freestanding building that you could imagine other buildings will, add to. So this is the opposite, where it seems to me this is the wall that, well, retaining wall would be a better way to think about it. That particular side of it was. But this is, on the inside, it's more like the corner.
Just
Yeah.
that thing that comes out like a skylight is the one that brings the light all the way at the end of the lobby, so people that would move all the way to the end and then backwards would have that advantage.
So this is between the underbelly and the top we looked at. But that's that glass emerging. I mean, where is that glass that comes out of the grass? The glass that comes out of the grass.
That's like
It's up there? Above there, so you don't see it.
no, you don't see it.
I mean, you don't see that form from inside.
No, from inside you don't see it because the pattern of the beams, they go all the way down, do not allow you to see that as a
It's not
feature. You see from the outside.
Very strange, or under the earth here. So buried, or yep. But you don't know it. It doesn't look that way at all.
Oh, this is a retaining wall. This
Yeah.
I can take back.
What is that material on the walls of this auditorium?
This is
The
a
upper right wall?
this is a wood panel that is made out of how you say when it's a reused wood, like it's called OSB. They get all the leftovers of wood and they make
Like particle board.
yeah. And they have tinted it with we have tinted it with black so that it doesn't look like really like what it is, but just almost like a very rough surface that the black tint has created that sense of continuity and closure.
Let me see the side view of it. The inside of the auditorium, the other view of it. There.
When you see from the other side, you have the photo.
All right, Luis.
Okay.
Well, thank you.